We'll go ahead and call tonight's meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody will rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Jesse, if you'll go through roll call.
Chair Clark.
Present.
Member Bryant.
Here.
Member Stark.
Here.
Member Jones.
Here.
And members Lamug and Gershenlauer, they have an excused absence. I did hear from both of them, and they could not be in attendance this evening.
Thank you very much.
And we do have a quorum.
All right. Per the agenda, presentation and recognition of the committees and board volunteers. So, Mr. Askew.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We just came up here, really appreciate beyond the council and the mayor, just like to thank everybody for coming here on your days off and working so hard for our Historical Preservation Board. Just want to leave it open if you guys ever need anything. If you're looking for something, feel free to make sure you check with staff and our city manager, but you can also reach out to city council as well. And look forward to seeing what you guys are doing. I try to watch as much as I can. But we really appreciate it, and we're going to give you a little certificate here and appreciation. And I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right. So, Andre, did you need to say anything at this point in time as representative? Otherwise, we'll go through the minutes. No? All right. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes from January 12th? And if so, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Stark, and I'll let Jesse decide who was first on the second.
I think I heard Ms. Jones.
You might
All
Loud mouth.
Not a problem. All right. All those in favor of the minutes as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. The minutes been approved. Thank you very much. Do not believe we have any old business at this time, especially since this is a special meeting. So we'll go on to the first item and only item of new business. Ms. Dalton, if you'd like to provide your presentation to us, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so you might have to help me out here with the, oh, okay. Don't need any help, this is so simple. So I'm very happy to be here, and I just wanted to say, and some of you may remember me, I'm not sure who was here at that time. I know for sure Paula was, but when your board was created, I had the honor to actually come and speak to your board in May for National Historic Preservation Month. And so for me, that was a real treat to speak to a new board. And then when I got the opportunity to work on the survey project, I was just absolutely thrilled. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to share with you information about the survey and what we learned, and actually some of the things that I want to focus on, which are recommendations for future for your board. Just a little bit about my background very briefly. I've been in historic preservation professionally for over 20 years, more than that as a hobby. I teach at Rollins College, Seminole State College, and New York School of Interior Design. I teach historic preservation in all three of those places. So I'm extremely passionate about historic preservation. The other thing I'm extremely passionate about is community planning. So I love working with citizens to achieve objectives. And I worked for 13 years as the Historic Preservation Officer and Community Planner for the City of Sanford. And I'm very proud of the work that we did over there, which of course without an excellent historic preservation board and CRA and all of that, wonderful things that you see in Sanford would not have been possible. So I recognize the dedication it takes and your time and all, but do know that that time is usually, especially speaking for somebody who was a staff person for 13 years, the investment, the time investment and the mental energy and everything from the board is tremendous. So I really respect all of you here and what you do. So just wanted to get that out there. But so this, of course, we're here to talk about the results of the survey and inventory project that we did, which was part of a state grant, and the state grant number is right up there. It was a small matching grant. And the project lead and historian on the project was Laura Lee Corbett. She's with Laura Lee Corbett Consulting out of Tallahassee. And I did all of the field work. So I did the field work, and I had a fieldwork assistant who is actually a graduate student who helped me with just a little bit of it, enough to kind of learn. So that was interesting. We did the field work during COVID, so as you can imagine, we had some challenges that were presented by that, but we did do as best as we could, considering that for some of our research, the archives were closed and all. Of course, definitely want to acknowledge St. Cloud Main Street and the Osceola County Property Appraiser. When we start with the survey and inventory, those records that we get from the property appraiser that's our basis for moving forward with anything. So the interaction with the property appraiser was extremely valuable. I can take this off. Okay.
I'm comfortable.
Okay, thank you. And of course, Paula with Main Street and Tabitha when she was here with Main Street. As a sidebar, I just want to say I am also a trustee of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. So I want to acknowledge Main Street and Florida Trust is now working in partnership together and in partnership on the conference as well. So annually our conference is now together. So as a board member of the Florida Trust, it was wonderful to work firsthand with the Main Street group. And I will tell you that St. Cloud has one of the stronger Main Street programs in my estimation in the state of Florida. So that was a lot of fun. So a small matching grant with the Florida Division of Historical Resources was the grantor. And what we were doing was we were updating a survey and inventory up to 1970. So the prior survey and inventory that you all had was pretty outdated. Usually a good rule of thumb is like every decade or so, at least, you want to be looking at your resources that are out there because, of course, certain things come of age, certain things get modified, certain things get restored, we hope, right? If the board is able to do their job and work with property owners, you might have some properties that were previously non-contributing that now may go to contributing and all of that. So it's a really good idea to do this exercise. Like I said, a minimum of every 10 years. I think every 5 years is actually a really great place to be if you can get there. But it is intense, so usually it requires at least a grant or something like that. So we looked at 222 structures, and we did a final survey report, which I know that you all have seen a copy of. And we looked at the buildings for eligibility to the National Register of Historic Places. So what buildings could actually individually be listed in the National Register, as well as what would make sense as far as boundary for a National Register historic district. So properties that are already listed in the National Register are the GAR building at 1101 Massachusetts Avenue, the St. Cloud Depot, which is at 915 New York Avenue, and Veterans Memorial Library and the Women's Club of St. Cloud Auditorium. That one actually got listed while we were working on the survey and inventory, and that's at 1012 to 1014 Massachusetts Avenue. So like I said, we had to look at updated a previously recorded survey that was, I will tell you, extremely well done. It was the one by Brenda Elliott that you all may have seen. It was very well done. And so when I got to the end and we were looking at the recommendations, Laura Lee and I, there were so many things. We were actually really excited because there were so many things that had been done that Brenda Elliott had recommended to do. So Working for local government for 13 years, I know that sometimes these things happen and they sit on a shelf and nothing gets done. But in this case, we saw that, wow, in the decades since she had done that survey and inventory, St. Cloud had actually taken action to do a lot of things. So that was really exciting to see. So we looked at resources built on or before 1970, and we looked at the integrity and condition of the buildings, and we also corrected any kind of inaccuracies in the information that we found that was previously recorded. So for research methods, we used the Florida Photographic Collection, local newspapers, published histories, we used the state archives, plat maps, we used the 1915, 1924, and 1931 Sanborn map. We used city directories or Polk County directories, St. Cloud chamber maps, and like I said earlier, we had a couple of limitations on actually doing in-person research at the archives because of COVID. We just simply could not get into the archives because they were closed down. The document that I was telling you about with the prior consultant was done in 1993, so as you can see, it was quite dated. In her survey, she looked at a much bigger survey area. There was 1,100 structures that were documented there. And the Florida Master Site File previously recorded structures. We looked at those as well, and 3 were listed on the National Register, like I said, when we kind of got underway on this. And if I mention something that you all are not sure what I'm talking about, like I just realized I said Florida Master Site File, you might not be aware of what that is, feel free to stop me. So are you all clear on where I'm at so far?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what we chose is looking at our boundaries for the grant is basically the Preservation Overlay District and Main Street program boundaries, because of course Main Street being the client, looking at the boundaries that were basically submitted by Main Street and the city for the grant. But those boundaries make sense too, because if you can mirror efforts with something that's already happening, in this case, you know, you had your overlay district, you had your CRA boundaries, all of that, those just built upon each other. So it was actually, in my opinion, a really good boundary setup to begin with. When we got to the end of this, Laura Lee and I did not feel like we needed to really make any big recommendations about boundary changes or anything. So it was well thought out in advance. So many historic resources in the city of St. Cloud. Like I said, you know, Brenda Elliott's survey was looking at 1,100. So I just want to acknowledge that there are properties outside of this survey boundary that you as a board might want to look at those properties and kind of consider, you know, National Register listing or what kind of things you could do locally to help those historic resources. And this is just a boundary map that we worked with. Okay. When we talk about integrity on historic properties, especially in a survey and inventory project like this, we're looking at kind of benchmarks that we have already had kind of outlined for us. And one of those things is if you're submitting a nomination to the National Register of Historic Places, you submit the nomination under different criteria. I'll just give you an example. It could be a site that is linked to an important historic event. That could be one criteria. Another criteria could be it's an example of architecture, like a really good example of a specific type of architecture. So there's 4 criteria you could submit under. But beyond that criteria, when you're doing a National Register nomination, the very important thing that's looked at is discussions of integrity. So they look at, you know, does it meet the criteria, but also is there integrity in this building, or, you know, survey of buildings here. And so integrity considerations are location, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. So something, you know, location. One of the things we might look at when we're looking at integrity of location is, has the structure been moved? So that would kind of lead to a discussion of, does it still have integrity? If it was moved, how far was it moved? You know, is it moved to a similar place? So it's just very important to understand that when we're looking at each one of these buildings, we're trying to assess all these different factors of integrity. when we're looking at integrity, we're also looking at things from an architectural perspective, like have there been a lot of alterations? Have windows been ripped out, vinyl windows put in? Has wood siding been ripped off, vinyl siding put on? That's just one example, but are the materials consistent with what was originally there? And that kind of consideration of the integrity and the physical condition of the building is what leads us to apply a classification that's either non-contributing or contributing. And so non-contributing, it doesn't really contribute by being there in any way to creation of a district, or contributing, it does. And when the federal government, and we send our National Register nominations to the state first, our State Historic Preservation Office, our SHPO, and if they're okay with it, they send it to the federal government. They are looking for a minimum number of contributing to non-contributing properties. So that's one of the other reasons why we kind of categorize it. So if you have a mapped area and 50% is non-contributing and 50% is contributing, they're going to look at that a certain way, as opposed to another area where 85% might be contributing. So these are just the different considerations that they look at when they're considering National Register districts. And that's, of course, what we looked at. So an example of a building that may have lost integrity, and I'm not picking on anybody here, because it's very clear that whoever owns this house takes very good care of the house, but you'll see that there were some alterations done to the building that are not consistent with the historic character of the building. So with this, they changed the architecture quite a bit. They put modern wall finish. They took a little bit of liberty with the architectural design. So this building here would be an example of one that we had decided would be a non-contributing building. And this one here also, there were some additions, there were reconfiguration, alteration of exterior windows and materials, and addition of a ramp, so that would be non-contributing. This here, you would see, is very close to the original construction on this. We had the prior survey photo, which you see on the left. And so you see that a lot of those character-defining features are still there. This is an example of one that we would classify as contributing. And of course, this building here definitely has integrity of location, setting, material, workmanship, and design, the First National Bank building. Wonderful building. That's probably one of my favorite ones. And this one too, this still has integrity. There's not really a lot of changes on this building. This is a two-part commercial building. So these are just some of the resources that we looked at, and we kind of applied these contributing to non-contributing. And in the report, you'll see that there's a whole Excel spreadsheet that we've got dates and what our classification that we applied and all of that. I will also note that when we worked on the report, we really worked closely with the State Historic Preservation Office. So it's not like we finished our report and we sent it and that was done. We finished our report, we sent it, they sent it back to us, we sent it back to them, and you go back and forth quite a bit until the state is happy with everything that you have in the report. So these are just a couple of more resources. We looked at 246 properties to determine if they were eligible for the National Register. We determined that 183 of these properties would contribute to a National Register historic district, and that 63 wouldn't. They would be classified as non-contributing. We also determined that 20 properties would be deemed to be individually eligible for listing on the National Register. And I'm just going to pause here because a lot of people don't understand this distinction, and actually even early on when I started working professionally, I didn't know there was a distinction. If these 20 properties right here that we've determined to be individually eligible for, if you all don't have plans to do a National Register district, I would recommend you focus on those 20 properties to get the individual listing. If the board in the city is thinking about doing a National Register district, those 20 properties, if they were contributing to the district, then you would not have the need to do individual nominations. If it's listed in the National Register, it's listed. So the National Register is an inventory. So if you're on the list, you're on the list. So if you're included as part of a district, then there is no need to do an individual nomination report. Does that make sense? Okay. And as I mentioned before, we've got these integrity factors and then the 4 criteria that we look at to see if a property is eligible. Usually we look at this very carefully if we're looking at individual listing. And A is that the property or site is associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of history. B is that they are associated with the lives of persons significant in the past. C is that it is significant for its architectural value. I'm paraphrasing, so I don't have to read all that to you. And D is the criteria that relates to basically archaeology, so prehistory. So those are the criteria that we look at for, especially these 20 that we're talking about would be individually eligible. And you'll see in your report that we have photographs of each one, and then we put what criteria would be eligible for, okay? We did pick up on the history that, as I said, Brenda Elliott was extremely thorough in that 1993 report she put together, and we fact-checked all of her history in there and corrected things as needed, but it was really very well done, and so we mostly picked up where her history left off. So we did a little overview. The state is very interested in learning more about African American history and culture in certain areas, so we did have to address that, even though historically St. Cloud has not had a large African American population. But you'll see in the report that there's a section relative to that. And then we covered St. Cloud history from 1940 to 1970, so you'll see that section in the report. So I'm sure if I repeat all this, it's stuff you already know, but St. Cloud was founded on April 16th, south of East Lake Toho. The Diston Plantation became the largest sugar mill in the country, and the GAR had a Civil War community in St. Cloud. So this community was really founded with the idea of having a veterans community, which is really kind of unique. So when we did our research on the African American history in St. Cloud, we saw that there was a plat that was recorded by the Osceola County Clerk of the Court on October 8, 1910 for what they referred to as the Color Quarter. And the census records for 1980 reflected that there were 7,742 residents in the city of St. Cloud and only 26 recorded as African American, which is 0.003%. And jump to 2000, census records reflected the population of being 20,074, with only 414 recorded as African American. That's 0.02%. So that's not a high, number or populations number as that goes. So, but we did look at that, and we did try to see was there any old African American communities in the area. All we were able to find was that old Osceola County map. And that's just a detail of it. So what we found when we were looking at the history of St. Cloud is from 1940 to 1970, that there was a big increase after 1940 with a 45% population increase between 1940 and 1950. And by mid-century, it was touted in newspapers and all as a community with a population of a large number of Spanish American World War I and World War II veterans, as well as retired civil service, railroad, and industrial employees. And of course, as with pretty much every place in the region, when Disney opened, there were impacts to the community. And what I see as being the real big impact that's happened to St. Cloud is, your 13th Street has changed quite a bit to be more like a highway going through your town. So that's obviously an impact to the town, but Disney did bring a lot of traffic to the region. It did bring a lot of visitors. There's things that you all could capitalize on in the future there, future planning. These are just some examples of the type of resources that we looked at. We looked at apartments, we looked at commercial resources, we looked at residential resources, social clubs such as the American Legion, and a couple of styles that jumped out over and over. Definitely the ranch style. We saw a lot of ranch, a couple of minimal traditional. And this map here is showing you, since the last survey, where we found structures had been demolished. So the prior survey, wherever you see here in pink, on the prior survey there were buildings there, but on our survey those buildings were already gone. This is the old ice plant, which was demolished. The Robert Ellis House. So what we found was residences, commercial and industrial, religious, and social recreational properties fit the categories of criterion C and criterion B. So they were either related to architecture or related to significant people. We recommended that the period of architectural significance in St. Cloud be extended to 1970 to meet that 50-year benchmark that they're looking at when they look at National Register nominations. And we found, as far as the styles go, that you have a mix of commercial and residential architectural styles that are from the mid to late 19th and early to mid 20th centuries. And the styles ran from Mediterranean Revival, Folk Victorian, Prairie, Colonial Revival. You have a lot of masonry vernacular in town, frame vernacular, a good representation of craftsmen, and you have some minimal traditional and ranch as well. So we categorized the residential styles kind of subcategories to each style name that I said. So in the folk form styles, these are kind of folk houses, vernacular. They're not designed by an architect usually, just the people who had the houses built. So those would be the frame vernacular, Holland parlor, pyramidal, shotgun, folk Victorian, masonry vernacular. So those are just your kind of working people who are, decided to have a house built, and that's what you've got. But you've got some good eclectic styles. The Mediterranean Revival in St. Cloud, it was referred to in a number of newspapers and other reports that we saw as the Spaniflora style, and Colonial Revival. And then for the modern house styles, they're called modern, but Craftsman falls into that minimal traditional, ranch, and mid-century modern. So the modern styles are basically like the post-Victorian era styles. The other kind of cool thing that you guys have in town is you have a good representation of Aladdin kit homes. This was something that Laura Lee and I had wished that we had a little bit more time to research. Like I said, we couldn't actually get into the archives, but whenever a community has kit homes, people tend to get really excited about that, whether it's a Sears kit home or Aladdin kit home. So we found some in town that we know some of them were Aladdin kit homes, and then others where we kind of thought, well, this could be, but we don't have it substantiated yet. But that's kind of a neat thing that you all have that not every community has. It's a cool part of your history. Here's one which is a Dutch Colonial Revival, and you can see it looks just like the one in the Aladdin kit home catalog from 1931. So here is the list. That's small, so I can't read it. I don't have my binoculars. But those are the 20 properties that we looked at that would be individually eligible. So if you weren't prepared to, like I said, do a full National Register nomination for a district, I would definitely recommend to kind of prioritize these and start going after National Register nominations for these. And this is where these individually eligible buildings are located. And the 20 are. So we've got 1003 Florida Avenue, built in 1911. That's the Osceola County State Bank, eligible under criteria A and C. Original St. Cloud Post Office, which is a really cool building because a building of this age, it's got the original windows, and if you stand there and look at it and stand outside it, you'll start seeing a lot of original on the first floor. It's one of those that I call a sleeper, where it's not been restored yet, but you've got everything intact to do a really nice high-level restoration. That one's at 1117 Massachusetts Avenue, built in 1909, and that's eligible under criteria A and C. Then you've got the electric plant, which is actually on the Florida Trust 11 most endangered list, because I know there's been ongoing discussions about demolition of this building due to the EPA Superfund. I think it's a Superfund. Is it Superfund site, right? Pretty sure. Anyhow, that one's at 901 Missouri Avenue, circa 1926. It would be eligible under criteria A and C. Then we got People's Bank, would be eligible under criteria B and C. That one was built in 1925. And this one's actually criteria B because it's related to Anna Ryan and Isabel Roberts, who were female architects of that time period. So that's pretty significant. The Norman Hurst at 1500 10th Street, criteria B and C. the Penn Flora Hotel at 11010 10th Street, 1924, criteria A. And it is a good example of the masonry vernacular style. I was talking about contributing and non-contributing before, so this is what it looks like in the map. That shows you your contributing and non-contributing resources on the map. And if you say, what about all the spots that don't have shading? Well, a lot of those could be post-1970, and some of them could be vacant lots. But remember, our survey looked at resources up to 1970, so that's what you're going to see shaded there. Our recommendations. First, I would say, pat yourselves on the back and actually go back and look at the Brenda Elliott document and take stock of how much you guys have actually accomplished as a city, because there's a lot of recommendations in there that actually were completed, and it would be really good for your board just to see that and take inventory of where you were, where you are now, and where you want to go. But I would say definitely consider creating a National Register district within the survey boundaries. Review the list that I just went through with you for the individual designations if you wanted to take that approach. That's going to really help you with, the individual National Register nominations and all this. Anytime you can get those, there's things that come along with it. One of which is, I love to talk about economic development, but if you're working with developers, one of the things they could get is the federal rehabilitation tax credit. So there's different things that benefit. Some people are afraid of National Register listing, but oftentimes I find if you really educate people, then they start seeing the value of it. And from an economic development perspective, you've got the rehab tax credit that you could work with property owners on. You've got, just tourism objectives. Once you get buildings National Register listed, people love to hear about that. So that's something that could really help your, approach to tourism, whatever you're trying to develop from a tourism perspective. And definitely one thing that you all should consider is working with St. Cloud Main Street to promote the ad valorem tax exemption, so for property owners. So that's a financial incentive to property owners who do a certified rehabilitation on a building. So that's something you should really look at, because anytime you can pull incentives into these historic properties, wonderful. And continued improved communication between the City of St. Cloud Building Department and Historic Preservation Board. I know when I was 13 years in local government, it was always helpful when I had the most conversations with the building department, because they're the ones working with the property owners and helping them through kind of a rehabilitation process. So, it's not a bad idea when any kind of applications come in from the building department, if they're affecting the potential districted area and the potential mapped area, like the non-contributing, contributing, all of that, just for staff to take a look at it. Because sometimes, even though it's not in a locally, it is locally designated, but there's certain things that you can, how do I want to say this? Not force, but encourage. So, if you've got a building permit in front of you and you see something that's kind of being proposed and it's just in the early proposal stages, your ordinance may not be able to dictate that could happen, but that it would be better if it went another direction. It gives you an opportunity to have that conversation, just to pick up the phone and call the property owner. So, and it is also good for the board to see the construction activity that's happening. So if you're working with the building department, just to know kind of the level of applications that are going through, like building permit applications, I feel like is very useful for the board and staff. So you all should consider reevaluating the current roster of contributing and non-contributing, because your survey was so old, 1993, and consider adding more for the Florida Master Site File, like properties that are outside this boundary that we looked at, because like I said, there's many more than the 200 plus that we looked at if you compare it to the last survey and inventory. You all have a lot of historic resources in town. And I think it's always good when you can have some kind of information that you can hand out to citizens, so some kind of pamphlet or PDF on your website that walks people through the process in layman's terms, because that's usually, you know, one of the issues is you're trying to work with property owners. You want them to really get interested in the historic preservation process, but they're so intimidated by local government. So the more that you can make it very personable and very, you know, here's the information in layperson's terms, the more buy-in you're going to get from citizens and the more interest you're going to get for historic preservation. So that was one of the things that we had felt we should see, was some kind of, you know, giveaway that you could give to citizens that, you know, it doesn't have to be something fancy. This could be very, you know, done very low cost, but some kind of information out there that would help them to understand the process. And of course, development of design guidelines is important because, you know, as all these communities in the region continue to grow and we continue to see development pressures, you know, a lot of times we start seeing what development we don't exactly like, development that we don't feel is in character to our communities. So working on design guidelines, if that's something that you all decided to pursue, you would work on design guidelines, of course, you know, probably with a consultant. You'd have meetings with your citizens. You'd have meetings with your elected officials and get a really idea of what St. Cloud design looks like. You don't want to look like a, you know, Winter Park or a Mount Dora or a Sanford. You want to look like St. Cloud. And so working on design guidelines would help you to kind of further refine what you want that to look like. Like, what do you want St. Cloud to look like in 10 years and 15 years and all of that? And design guidelines, once you have them created and implemented, that's what's going to guide all of that for your future end goals. So design guidelines are extremely important. It is definitely something that you all should think about. Am I already to the end?
Yeah.
My goodness. How fast did I go through that?
Pretty fast.
Half an hour.
Okay. So, I'm hoping I have questions from you all. Know that I don't have the document in front of me, so I might have to borrow your document or open it up.
Anybody have questions?
No, it looks very similar to what I saw at the breakfast. Was this something different than the breakfast?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was the same. I asked my questions then, sorry.
I think it was very informative as far as not having had a chance to actually look at the survey yet. I'm looking forward to being able to do that.
I just love all the pictures that you included. Super cool.
Yeah, it's really nice to see where you've been. That's why when you do multiple survey documents, one of the things I used to do in Sanford, I'm going to give you an example. We had a really active local nonprofit, preservation nonprofit, and their members of the nonprofit would go out and take photos all the time, and they'd give me the photos. So I used to take like the photo from our survey and inventory and the photo from our second survey and inventory, and then any photos that group would provide to me. So I would have this, you know, progression of like 5 photos of the house over the course of 15, 20 years. And that was always nice, especially new property owners coming in, to be able to show them, like, that's, you know, I'd have property owners like, my house used to be yellow, just even that simple thing of like a color change, you know. So, yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned that plat where there was a designation where the colored people were to live. Was that property within the boundary area of where this would apply?
No, it was well
Okay.
outside the boundary area.
Right, and the reason I'm bringing that up is the statistics you gave us for the percentage of colored people in St. Cloud. What geographic area was that from?
The location of it,
Yes,
at the end of 10th Street in Unricosi on County Road 15, the Winn-Dixie.
Right.
okay, was that where this plat was?
That's, if you look at the,
Yes.
if you're looking at what the exhibit is, the magenta highlighted area on that is pretty much that whole eastern half of that is the property that's, commercial
Okay,
property that's
because
Winn-Dixie.
I know someone
And
that
a little bit of the
has
residential.
done research with regard to the black churches in this area, and she knows where they all were. And I don't know about the population, but there were a good number of these churches, and I imagine they were fairly well populated. So I just bring that up as a point of information.
That was something that we did want to do additional research on, but we did not have access to the archives at that time to see if we could uncover more maps or anything like that. So really, the limited information that we have here was what we were able to find at that time.
Okay. Which map were you referring to, Mr. Clark?
I've got it up on the overhead
It's the
here.
one that's on
Oh,
the exhibit right
okay.
now. It's
It's in front of you now.
7.2 in your packet.
Got it.
And so are there?
Thank you.
So are there contributing structures in there, or we don't know?
No,
That's-
well, it was
that's outside
outside
of
of
the
the
scope of
survey
the
area, so
survey
we
area.
didn't make any determinations.
No,
Yeah.
it was out of the survey area, so those numbers are irrelevant to the survey area that you gave with regard to the population of the colored people.
Those numbers were based on the data of that time of the St. Cloud city limits at the time of those numbers, if that makes sense.
The census data.
Right.
Yeah, census data.
Those were the numbers in St. Cloud, but not necessarily the boundaries of our area.
Right, it would have been
Okay.
the St. Cloud boundaries.
Okay, got it.
I look forward to digging through the survey and getting a little more and asking whether the GIS people can get this as an overlay on the interactive map that the city has.
Okay? No other questions?
Thank you very much for,
You guys were
Making-
easy on me.
Well, I'm gonna have to digest this. I'm like a cow. I have to digest it several times.
Yeah, certainly. And if you have, as you're going through it, because it is a lot of information, if you have any questions, let Paula know, let Andre know. Andre knows how to get a hold of me, of course, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And as you, of course, go through the process, like if you decide that you want to focus on, these National Register nominations, or you want to focus on, trying to get a grant for the whole district, if you have questions about how to structure that and put it together, I mean, you've got somebody on your board who's a wealth of information, but I'll be happy, and I'm sure Laura Lee will be happy to answer any additional questions you have.
thank you, appreciate that. All right. So with no other questions for Ms. Dalton, I guess we'll open up for the public comment.
They're rushing.
Would you like to be the public and make a comment?
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
have a question for Andre, if he could come forward.
So we'll move into the information section there with your question.
Sorry.
No, that's what would be the next anyway.
My question is in response to, I have two questions, is in response to something that Mr. Agnew said. He said if we have questions to call him or to call staff. I've been told that contacting staff constitutes ex parte communication.
It only, Andre Anderson, Community Development Director, ex parte communication, I'm not an attorney, only relates to when you have to act on an item. So in other words, if there's an item before you for approval or denial, and you have communication with the public or someone that might be related to the project, having communication with staff is not necessarily considered ex parte because we are staff to the board to provide a staff report. But if you have a communication with a resident relating the item or the applicant themselves, you typically are asked to identify that information.
I understand that, but if I have question a question about something that's in a staff report I receive. Can I call the staff member
Yes, you can.
about that?
Yes. Because you
Okay.
need clarification. Many times at least there's only one board that we do this with, and that's the city council, where we have a briefing with the city council so they can ask questions about items that they're going to act on. We don't have enough staffing to hold briefings with all our boards. So the only board we have that with right now is the city council.
Okay.
But it's something that we're looking to do in the future, because it helps facilitate the meetings when we have these discussions with the board members such as yourself.
And now my second question is, I've heard through the grapevine that Annie is no longer with us. And now, if she's no longer with us, who is going to be staff to our board, or do you know?
I do. We are grooming someone currently right now to take that position. We are still working with her. At this point, it will be Sydney Kendrick, and she's a new employee with us, and we are having some discussions with her right now to get her up to speed on the items. But until then, you are welcome to contact me or Melissa Dunklin, the Planning and Zoning Manager, if you have any questions about this board.
Okay, so do you think we'll know who that staff person is going to be
That
by
staff
March
person is
9th?
Sydney Kendrick.
Okay, and she's already an employee in the department?
Yes, she is.
Hallelujah. You're doing good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. Are there any other members that wish to address anything informationally at this time? All right. If not, we
So
will.
then, well, I do have one question. So now that we've gone through this, will we now start to move forward with starting to design the standards, or what would be our next step?
Well, that was one of the items that was on the goal list that we had Annie outline, and it wasn't the very top of the list. It was a few down because we
Few down.
had some other things we wanted to do. But I'm sure we have to have staff, you know,
Yeah, we'll
figure out what that process is going to be.
we have a meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So,
And-
I mean, that's really where I think we'll end up talking about our goals and objectives, which was one of the item, which technically would have been an old business item.
And hopefully
of
we'll
this,
have a-
but this was a special meeting. so-
We'll have a full board on March 9th, I hope.
So that information now from Annie that we worked hard on to get will now move forward with the new
With Sydney.
Sydney, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
excuse me,
And as always, Jesse, in that
And
helping to
Jesse,
coordinate
yes.
things. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
could I ask, could you see that Sydney provides our new board members with copies of this information so that they...
of the survey, Andre, is basically what I believe she's asking for, is to actually get a copy of the survey available to us.
Yes, if our new members, once they're appointed, if they could get copies of this document,
Or put it in the Dropbox that Annie had created for us?
Has she created? I have not gotten a link
Yes,
for it.
I had planned to do that tomorrow, to drop that document in there.
Okay.
do you have more of these?
I have it electronically.
Okay, so you could print up some for the new members for the March 9th meeting? so
Yes, I
they
can
have
add that to
them.
their welcome packet.
Did you
yes,
say you haven't
Great.
got the Dropbox link yet?
No.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'm just
very good.
wringing my hands over here like
Thank you,
the
Roger.
grandma
Jesse, can you
I
make
am.
sure to send out the Dropbox link to us all again, please?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because
Thank
I checked my emails and didn't have any Dropbox link. That's why I was asking in regards to, getting
And I
access
don't
to the
have a
survey.
Dropbox link.
Okay. And it's actually, it's not the Dropbox, it's just called Box.
Yes.
So it's a little different.
It's like Xerox,
Yeah.
sorry. It's going to be that way for a while.
They cut the drop off.
Using the trademark name as a generic.
Oh, good meeting.
So, all right, if there's no other information, our next meeting is, like I said, in 2 weeks, Tuesday, March 9th at 6 p.m. I'll call the meeting to be adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.